Shabbat Shalom, everyone. It's so lovely to see you after the couple of weeks I've been away. We watched the online service, and it was lovely to be with you in the internet land, but it's even better to be with you in person. As it was said earlier, today is Shabbat, Vayechi, and he lived. The Torah reading came from the book of Bereshit, chapter 50, verses 22 to 26, and it's the last few verses of the book. If you read the whole parasha, you start with chapter 47, 28, and read to the end. The Haftarah came from the 1 Kings 2nd chapter, verses 1 to 12. And the Messianic writings came from the first letter of Kepha, or 1 Peter, chapter 3, verses 8 to 16. As I already mentioned, today is the last parasha in the book of Bereshit, and I think reading it and contemplating briefly over what it tells us is it's really appropriate to call it as a parasha of closure. We are closing one chapter in a story of redemption, the story of a family, Israel as a family. And when we come back here next Shabbat, we will see that this family turned into a nation. Couple hundred years pass in between the last verse of the chapter 50 and the verses of the next book. It's a parasha which deals with kind of sad things in life, really. It talks about Yaakov's request for burial. He didn't want to be buried in the land of Egypt. He wanted to be buried in the land which was promised to his family. And also he speaks for the final time to his sons, to his family, and imparts words of wisdom, blessing for each one of them. Which to us indicate, and they are prophetic in nature when you read it. They give us insights into the future developments for those sons, the families, and the tribes. We also read about Yaakov's death, his burial. And finally, as we read today in the reading of the Torah, we also read about the death of Yosef. And this is just interesting as a kind of slight note on the side. This is really interesting because Yaakov had 12 sons, but we only know about the death of one of them, Yosef. We read about that. We don't know what happened to the other one, to the other sons or their families. The record of the family, the history of the family truly ends, in this sense, with the death of Yosef. It tells us a little bit about the role of Yosef in the family, on which I will touch a little bit later, but I think we need to reflect on this fact that while we have stories which we read and understand from the lives of the other sons, Yehuda and kind of what happened there, actually, when it comes to recording the life and death of the sons, it's only Yosef. We have that record. It also tells us about how the Torah looks at the role of the individual and the impact they have in their life, because truly we only learn about the impact of an individual in their death, while the life is lived is still happening. We still can change. The impact we have can change. But truly, the true value and impact of human life, of someone's life, is only realized when we go and meet our Maker. The Haftarah portion which we read truly mirrors this transitional narrative, the narrative of closure. One chapter finishing, the next chapter starting on. The Haftarah tells us about the final words of King David. And actually, if you listened really carefully through the reading, this is the one bit when he's no longer called King David. He's only called as David. In the final moments which he has with his son Shlomo, and we know that by this time the kingship has passed over to Shlomo, who has been appointed as the heir. It also tells us that in our last moments, we truly are not the role we have or the status we have. We are the human being that God created when we go and meet him. I also, as I read through the two passages, found it really interesting when we read them, the final words which both men are given to their families. By this point, they knew that they are going to die and they are going to meet their God. And so the words which they impart are truly the most important things which they have yet to say to his family. The thing which really need, like this is you really need to pay attention to this. For Yaakov, one of the important things for him was to be buried back in the land of promise and not in the land of Mitzrayim. It was so important he made his sons to promise they will deliver this as he was imparting his final words. It's interesting to read what David had to say to Shlomo. In smile, hearing, be a man, and make sure you obey the Torah, all the commandments, everything. For David, this obedience and walking in God's commands was the most important thing which will characterize his son as a true grown-up adult man and king over the nation. That relationship with God which David had, he wants his son to follow that pattern of walking with God in righteousness. As I was reading those passages, I was also struck with the way how the Torah tells us about a topic which has so painfully been aired in a public domain this week, and that's the rule of succession. And this is the question on who is going to lead the family, who is going to be the tribal leader, who is going to lead the family of Israel into the future, or for that matter, who is going to be the king over Israel in the next generation. Those are all questions which we encounter as we read the Torah. And in many ways, they are completed in the narratives we read today. And as we read, there's something new and interesting emerge. It's because when we learn these passages, we learn that leadership does not always pass over to the most obvious, the firstborn, the natural heir in the family who would lead the nation, the family forward. And the Torah tells us this story, the same story, again and again. It's not an aberration, actually. It's something in there which tells us that God often favors the younger son. We hear about Avel over Cain, Isaac as the true heir instead of Ishmael, who was Abraham's firstborn, Yaakov instead of Esau. But the narrative continues throughout the generations. Yehuda, we hear in the blessings and the prophetic words which are said. Yehuda was the fourth in the line. He was the last of the sons of Leah. And of course, Yosef, we have to remember, the only son whose death we have recorded in the Torah, and we will talk about what is in there. But truly, it provides us a narrative and closure. Yosef was 11th son. Yes, he was firstborn of Rachel, but he was way down the pecking order if we think about the birthright. In the next generation, Perez superseded Zerah, Tamar's sons, and Ephraim superseded Manasseh, of which Yosef himself wasn't very happy about. And of course, let's remember King David. He was the youngest one out of 7 sons, who all were deemed to be men of stature, really, if we looked at them through human eyes only. And finally, as we were talking about Shlomo, we are not quite sure if he was the youngest one, but he was definitely one of the younger sons of David. And in each case which we hear, maybe not so much with Perez and Zerah, they were just being born when that happened, but we hear the struggles in the family, the pain that it can cause, where this struggle continues, and also the grudges which it can create. It's something which clearly is still alive, because all families are alike down the history. And what is so interesting about it? Is it because the eldest assume the position of leadership, they believe it's theirs by natural order, because they are the oldest, the strongest, the wisest? Or is there something else? Because actually, when we look at the list of names, what we know that some of those swaps and changes happen before those boys turn into men and take an action. I mentioned Perez and Zerah, who were just being born, poor Tamar, or when they are young, with Ephraim and Manasseh. They had no time to prove themselves or their character. And I think truly what the Torah teaches us is that in God's plan, nobody is the spare one. Where every child, every man, and every woman are given the potential to walk path of righteousness. The Torah parasha truly tells us, reveals that good leadership does not come from the position of birth. It comes from the qualities of character they nurture. And ultimately, God knows and sees inside our souls, and he knows which person possesses those qualities needed for that particular moment in history, that particular role in history. And ultimately, God makes that choice. It led me to look into what makes a good leader. You can Google it, there's so much out there. But I think if I summarize what comes out from all this, it says that whoever it is, this person needs to have integrity. They need to have self-awareness, be courageous, have respect, empathy, and gratitude. Because the main role of a good leader is to motivate and inspire those around him. And what this parasha tells us, that people are not born this way. They become like that. It's a parasha when we speak about Yaakov and the closure of his life. I think this is just an example to confirm the case, because if we talk about self-awareness and integrity, with Yaakov, when we look at the early part of his life, he is somewhat lacking in those qualities. I mean, he tricked his brother, then he tricked his father. He pretty much lied to them, to his father in that regard of the blessing. His self-awareness is zero, really, when it comes to kind of what might be wrong, and his spiritual awareness, which we might count into it, is very, very low. We can't discount him on having courage. But I think what we see is that Yaakov wasn't that head of the family, the one appointed leader. He wasn't that naturally. But what he had was the vision and understanding of the importance of God's promise for his family and the future nation that will be born out of that family. And this was the one thing that has not left him throughout the life. We can see this vision, understanding of the future in the blessings, the prophetic words which he passes to his sons and imparts them with those words. And perhaps finally we see it in his desire to be buried in the land he was promised. As he knew that one day they will go back. When I was preparing this, it kind of led me to the Messianic writings reading, the letter written by Kepha. And he was one who knows about these qualities that we need to have. But what we hear from Kepha as we read it today is actually all of those qualities which he mentioned, to be sympathetic to each other, to love each other, to be compassionate. Those are qualities that are not about just, they're not qualities just for good leaders. They make for good community. They're qualities that we need as we walk with God, the path of righteousness. There's another aspect which I noted as I was reading those verses in the parasha, and that is that as we are reading about Torah, as we are reading in the Torah dealing with generational transitions, it also tells us that transitions are not clean cut. There are burdens, tasks that the previous generation has left unfulfilled, incomplete, something which needs to be resolved for the history to move forward. Both men, Yaakov and David, had some unfinished business to pass over to the next generation. And as we see in their last words, they complain about the insubordinate family members. and the impact those actions in the past have on the future. Yaakov is still not happy about the acts of Shimon and Levi, which happened in Shechem, and also actions of Reuven, who was the natural firstborn. One of the reasons why the leadership passed to Yehuda. David has not forgotten the killings, the war in the peacetime, which were done by his nephew, Yoav, and also the curses that Shimei passed on David when he was on his way to Menaim. What we see here are both men at the end of their lives, and there are still some slights and actions that need to be addressed. They're burning bright in their memory, and they cannot be left in the past. But the way how they deal with those is a little bit different for each of them. Yaakov deals with those pains he still has in his heart. In his last words, which we read now in the Bereshit, chapter 49, when we have the prophetic words, those words are important. We are dealing with a family where there is a culture of narrative being passed down. It's not necessarily written, it's said, passed down, and each son and tribe are given prophetic words which will be remembered down the generations. And we also know that with some of the families, as they are, they become fulfilled over the period of time of what Yaakov predicted in his words. For David, I think it's more complicated, because not only he is a man who is giving advice to his son, but also he is the king, and some of the slights and actions which he's addressing with Shlomo are slights against the kingship rather than just David's personal honor, as the case with Shimei and the curses and the fact that the nation is watching and remembering, and that those need to be closed even if it's done by the next generation. And it's really interesting how David, when he gives those instructions, he urges Shlomo to follow the Torah and the commandments and the righteousness, and he also appeals to his wisdom and understanding to address those issues in the way that is appropriate. And finally, I think the reading of this parasha brings us hope. What we see here is the completion of both Jacob's and Joseph's lives. Both men dealt with numerous conflicts and struggles. I wouldn't call their lives as easy lives. Far from it. They suffered pain of injustice, heartbreak caused by the family breakdown. They were exiled from their home, and they were made to work for others, either as slaves or without getting what they asked for. We could say they were abused, taken advantage of. Those were not easy lives. But what we read is that both of them, they were ultimately blessed by God. And in their struggles, they prevailed. They led the family and the future nation forward, and they were able to protect them in a time of need. They were both rewarded by seeing their family reunited. I think the words which we read today about Joseph are beautiful ones. We can see that he's done all he was asked for. He reassured his brothers that the family is safe. He holds no grudges. He understood the role he had in God's plan of salvation. And what we read is that Joseph lived 110 years, and he saw his son Ephraim's children to their third generation. And the children of his grandson, Machir, the son of Menashe, they were also brought on his knees. It's a verse, but it's a beautiful verse because it tells us that in his life he also experienced the peace and blessing of united family. And to us, this is an encouragement. I think we need to think about it as we continue with our journey, not to judge ourselves by the life which we have lived, because we have not lived it to the full extent that God has in plan. We are on a journey. Peter Kepha writes in his letter, as we read, "Whoever would love life and see good days must keep their tongue from evil and their lips from speaking deceitful speech. They must turn from evil and do good. They must seek peace and pursue it. For the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their prayer. But the face of the Lord is against those who do evil." Kepha did not make these verses up. They are a quote from the Psalm 34. It's not something new he invented. This is what it means to lead a righteous life. Peter continues with his own guidance that we should heed and take to our hearts as we continue on our journey of obedience to God, when he said in his verses, "Who is going to harm you if you are eager to do good? But if you should suffer from what is right, you are blessed. Do not fear their threats, and do not be frightened. But in your hearts revere Messiah as the Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for this hope that we have. But do this with gentleness and respect, keeping a clear conscience, so that those who speak maliciously against your good behavior in Messiah may be ashamed of their slander." They are wise words which Kepha said, something to remember as we continue on this journey, and know that only God himself knows the future. And we need to trust him, because he will guide us through whatever is to come.